Jay, good to see you. Thank you so much for having me back to Istanbul. It's a pleasure to be with you at MARKA once again. The last time I was here a few years ago, I was talking about how difficult it is for me to move through airports because I have a Pakistani passport. I was born in Afghanistan and I grew up in Syria. So this topic is a lot more fun, for me at least. I spent some time here in Istanbul over the last few years while I was working on my last book, New Kings of the World. And even when I wasn't in Istanbul, I was thinking about Turkey and watching Turkey for a lot of my time. New Kings of the World is a book about power, specifically cultural power, and how globalization has changed not only how we trade and how we travel, but also how we imagine and what fantasies we ally ourselves to. This past century saw American culture as largely uncontested. If you were watching a film or TV or listening to music that wasn't from your country, it was likely from America. And American culture was spread not just by its inherent coolness, not because it was more sophisticated than anyone else's culture, not because it was more exciting than anyone else's culture, but it was also spread largely by the American military defense complex. The American military is the most widely deployed military in world history. And they maintain massive infrastructures outside of their borders, with bases all across every continent, pretty much, and huge infrastructure behind those bases. So at its height, in 1968, more than 1 million American military personnel were deployed to over 54 countries. And that means that you didn't just have 1 million people all over the world with their tastes and their interests, but you had these huge bases that screened concerts, that screened films, and that had many people that needed to be entertained. Today, just under 200,000 American military personnel are deployed, which is the lowest number in the past 6 decades. So one might argue that as troop numbers decline, so does cultural influence. There are, of course, other reasons. Soft power only works if the power behind it is seen as credible, and it's not been a good few years for America. Add to that migration, urbanization, and globalization being exposed as a lie, essentially. So in 2015, over 1 billion people moved. But unlike what everyone in Europe or America would think, only a small number of those people left their own countries and moved across borders. Only 244 million migrated abroad. But the majority, some 763 million, migrated internally within their own countries. They went from rural areas into the city. And crammed into cities with no support, alone and afraid, hundreds of millions of people have found none of the wealth, power, and access that globalization had promised them. So while the past century was an American century, I think it's safe to say that this one is not going to be. So consider this. This was once the emblem of global cultural power. I mean, I don't even remember why he's shooting at an office, but it's kind of revealing about American power. It's messy, it's indiscriminate, and it's kind of show-offy. But Rambo is no longer the global symbol of cultural power anymore. This is the new symbol.
ये काली काली आँखें, ये गोरे गोरे गाल, ये तीखी तीखी नजरें, ये हिरनी जैसी चाल, ये काली काली आँखें, ये गोरे गोरे गाल.
Yeah, I thought I wouldn't make you suffer through more than 20 seconds of that. But jokes aside, and leaving aside, more importantly, that India faces enormous challenges, and Bollywood as well, exactly at this moment when Bollywood has rapidly devolved into essentially a propaganda industry for the state, for the hard-right fascist government of Narendra Modi that, as we speak, is currently shutting the internet down across India and beating and arresting peaceful protesters. Leaving that aside, it's still worth it to note that India produces up to 2,000 movies a year, more than any other country in the world, in over 20 languages, and it sells more box office tickets than Hollywood, and it grows faster than any other cinema industry on the planet. And Bollywood was once an industry that tackled very important issues of its society. But today I'm not so sure they'll have the courage to fight the political ugliness that's in their path in order to truly translate their vision to the world. But I'm going to tell you very briefly about two other industries that I also wrote about. And they also face some serious challenges. But it seems at the moment that they have the ability so far to portray more than just one vision of themselves. And so their climb looks safe at the moment.
Kesin bir yuvası var şu hayatta. Bizimki de çukur.
Getirin bana bu aşağıdaki arsız kızı. Buradaki kızların hepsi sultan için hazırlanırlar. Seçilirsen bir de erkek çocuğun olursa Hazreti Sultan.
So for the record, South Korea is the only non-Western country that has successfully exported not just one, but all of its cultural products around the world. But I've been to Turkey enough times to know that you're not interested in another story if there's a Turkish one. So I will talk to you a little bit about your own industry and specifically your television industry. So I visited the set of Çukur when I was here writing New Kings. And I also interviewed Halit, who gave me the shock of my life when he sang Jive Jive Pakistan. So apparently you are the only other country in the world that knows the words to that song besides mine, besides Pakistan. Is that right? Do all of you know the words? Okay. Congratulations. I traveled all over the world for this book. I went to Syrian refugee camps in Lebanon. I went to South America, to Peru. I was in Peshawar, a northern city in Pakistan, and everywhere that I went, I found Dizzy.
ये बिल्कुल ठीक नहीं हुआ। जैसे ही वालिदा के साथ ताल्लुकात ठीक हो रहे थे, कहाँ से आ गई ये बीमारी؟ شو هالوش؟ شو عم تعملي بأسعد يوم بحياتي؟ بدك تخربي هذا الزواج.
En ningún lado.
¿Con quién estás?
Con nadie.
Dime si o no te atraparon.
¡No!
So I don't know if you know, but Fatma Gul is like topping the ratings in Spain at this moment. And the two other languages were Urdu and Arabic. And in the Middle East, the same voice actors will dub the same actors for all of their shows. And they'll also give them the same name, regardless of how many different people they play. So Kivanch is named Muhammad in the Middle East, and he will forever be Muhammad. Even when he's like 70 years old, they'll call him Muhammad. So today you are the second largest television distributors in the world. You are second only to America. And for comparison, at its height, The Bold and the Beautiful had been watched by a global audience of 26.2 million people, according to the Guinness World Book of Records. But at its height, Magnificent Century had been watched by over 200 million people, although its distributors in Istanbul told me that that number is now closer to 500 million people. In 2007, foreign sales of Turkish television shows brought the country the grand total of $1 million. And 10 years later, the value of Disney exports is now over $350 million, and you're edging towards 500. The question of what makes Turkish television so watchable is not just the stories, and they are very watchable. I watched, I think, 134 hours of Turkish TV when I was writing this book. And it's not down to how beautiful everyone is, because every single person in any show, I think legally is required to be beautiful. But Turkey's rising position as cultural imperialists has to do with something simpler and more complex at the same time: values. So unlike American television, Turkish television can be watched by the entire family together. No one's eyes need to be covered, no one's ears need to be covered, there's no swearing, there's very little violence. The hero will almost never hold a gun in his own hand. And the romantic relations are very chaste. The couple in Fatma Gul don't kiss until, I think, the 58th episode. And every episode is like 2.5 hours long. So these are not shows about which billionaire son is going to inherit his father's empire. These are shows about ordinary men and women struggling to survive with the force of the world against them. What does a young woman in Guatemala who is struggling to earn money to feed her children, what does she have in common with the characters of Friends? Nothing. What does she have in common with the women of Sex and the City? I mean, absolutely nothing. But she does relate to Fatma Gul. She does relate to the difficulty and the necessity of fighting power and society in order to defend your dignity. And if you were a developing society in the post-World War II era, you had one country to aspire to: America. And popular culture was a huge part of that American project. It was largely popular culture, more than politics in many ways, that defined America for the world as a place of opportunity, freedom, and modernity. So Asian popular culture and its rise isn't a rejection of America or that idea of America. It's in many ways a mimicry of that model. But it presents itself as a new face. It is all those aspirational qualities, and it shows a people on the rise, working harder to become captains of industry and the world. But with one important addition, which is that those people are ethical and they have values and morals. And those factors safeguard not just the society around them, but the family, women, the youth, and so on. Entertainment is built on fantasy. It's not reality. It's a fantasy that tells you how a nation or how a people wish to be seen rather than what they really are. And as fun as it is, it's not innocent. Culture is a weapon, and it's being used domestically, regionally, and globally. And anyone with a vision to the future is using it in this way. So at the end of the General Assembly at the UN this past September, Pakistan announced that along with Turkey and Malaysia, they were all going to form a television channel that's going to be designed to combat Islamophobia. Netflix, which has a global subscriber list of 158 million people, might be the most popular name. You might all know the name Netflix, but there are Nigerian streaming platforms that are hosting only Nollywood, only Nigerian films, that have double, triple the number of Netflix's viewers. And most interestingly, TikTok is taking over our screens and has more users per month than Twitter or Snapchat. And if you've seen TikTok, you know that the videos are cute and they're silly and they're funny. But don't forget that it's a Chinese company. And you might not think of those really cute hedgehogs as the new frontier of the culture wars, but it is. Thank you.